EU Migration Pact in crisis, growing tensions between Brussels and several member states. The implementation of the new EU Migration Pact is encountering increasing resistance within the European Union. Several member states, including Hungary, Poland and Slovakia, have announced that they will not implement key parts of the agreement or will do so only partially. This development marks a significant challenge for Brussels, as a number of Eastern European countries openly question one of the European Commission's most important reform plans. Observers describe this as one of the most significant tests for the EU's asylum and migration policy in years. Brussels' objective: uniform rules and shared responsibility. The EU Migration Pact, formally adopted in spring 2025 after years of negotiations, aims to standardise asylum procedures across the Union and to distribute responsibility among member states more equitably. Central to the reform is a mandatory solidarity mechanism. Countries that do not wish to host asylum seekers can instead make financial contributions, estimated at around €20,000 per migrant not accepted. The pact is intended to create a more efficient, fair and solidarity-based system than the previous Dublin arrangement. President Ursula von der Leyen and the Commission repeatedly described the pact as a milestone for European unity. However, shortly after its adoption, it became apparent that implementation would face significant political resistance from several member states. Hungary and Poland as leading opponents. Hungary and Poland had already exercised their veto powers multiple times during the negotiations. Both countries have maintained a migration-critical stance for years, emphasizing that decisions regarding asylum seekers should remain under national jurisdiction. Budapest and Warsaw view the solidarity mechanism as an unacceptable interference in domestic affairs. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has repeatedly framed the issue as one of protecting national sovereignty, warning against a centralist EU approach. According to the Hungarian government, mandatory acceptance or financial contributions would undermine member states' control over their migration policies. Poland, under the Conservative government of Karol Nawrocki, has expressed similar concerns. In an official letter to the Commission, Warsaw stated that it would not accept mandatory relocation mechanisms, citing the country's limited capacity after having already received millions of Ukrainian refugees. Slovakia joins the opposition. Recently, Slovakia has joined the ranks of dissenting member states. Prime Minister Robert Fico, who returned to office in autumn 2024, announced that his government would align more closely with neighbouring Hungary and Poland. Fico stated that Slovakia would not provide financial contributions for unaccepted asylum seekers and firmly rejected mandatory relocation. The decision was justified as a measure to protect national interests and maintain social stability. In practical terms, Slovakia has significantly tightened its asylum policies in recent months. According to the Ministry of the Interior, Bratislava is currently processing very few asylum applications from non-Ukrainian third-country nationals. Statistics reveal a sharp decline, whereas in 2024, Slovakia processed 10 to 15 asylum applications per month on average. Today, it is only a handful, almost exclusively from Ukrainians with special status. Observers in Brussels interpret Slovakia's decision as a clear signal of closer alignment with its neighbours and a growing convergence with the so-called Visegrad Group. This alliance, consisting of Hungary, Poland, the Czech Republic and Slovakia, has frequently acted as a bloc against EU migration policy decisions in recent years. Brussels faces a dilemma. The European Commission now finds itself in a difficult position. On one hand, it must ensure compliance with EU law. On the other hand, imposing overly strict sanctions on member states risks further eroding political cohesion. EU diplomats report that the Commission is considering whether exemptions could be granted to Poland or Slovakia to prevent an open conflict. Brussels has not officially confirmed these discussions. Meanwhile, concern is growing internally that the Migration Pact may have little practical effect without broad support. A senior EU official, speaking on condition of anonymity, remarked, "If several major member states refuse to implement the pact, it loses credibility. Then the entire European migration framework is at stake." Germany's position. Germany continues to be one of the strongest proponents of the Migration Pact. Chancellor Friedrich Merz has repeatedly emphasized that a European approach is essential to limit irregular migration and ensure a fair distribution of asylum seekers. At the same time, Berlin faces significant domestic pressure. In 2025, the number of asylum applications has risen by over 30% compared to the previous year, according to the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees. Many municipalities report overcrowding, insufficient accommodation, and financial strain. Several local leaders, including mayors and district councils, are calling for tangible relief. The debate over potential adjustments to reception and integration policies is also growing within Germany's governing coalition. Critics warn that the country could be disproportionately burdened if other EU member states fail to meet their obligations. Czech Republic, between compliance and opposition. In the Czech Republic, the Migration Pact has also sparked debate. Former Prime Minister Andrej Babiš described the agreement as disadvantageous for national security and stated that he would review all obligations should he return to government. Although the current Czech administration has supported the pact, polling indicates that over 60% of the population oppose mandatory migrant quotas. Analysts interpret this as evidence of growing skepticism toward EU migration policies in Central and Eastern Europe. Political commentators increasingly refer to an axis of restraint, stretching from Warsaw through Bratislava and Budapest to Prague. Impact on EU cohesion. The debate surrounding the Migration Pact has exacerbated tensions between Brussels and several national capitals. While the Commission emphasizes shared responsibility and solidarity, dissenting governments stress the primacy of national decision-making. Observers have compared this conflict to previous disputes over rule of law, compliance, EU budgetary policy, and climate commitments. Some diplomats have warned of a new East-West divide within the Union. A representative of the European Parliament noted, "Migration has the potential to further divide the EU politically." Ignoring member states' concerns risks a repeat of the polarization we witnessed during the 2015 refugee crisis. At the same time, calls for pragmatic solutions are growing. Several EU members, including Italy and Greece, which face significant migration pressures, emphasize that reform remains necessary. They urge Brussels to allow for flexible implementation and to account for regional realities. Economic implications. The dispute over the pact also has economic consequences. Under the solidarity mechanism, financial contributions are intended to partially support EU border states. If the mechanism is delayed, blocked, or partially implemented, funding for border security, asylum processing, and integration programs could be reduced. Countries such as Italy, Spain, and Greece fear increased financial burdens. Economic uncertainty is also becoming evident. Analysts warn that prolonged political tensions could destabilize the single market. The greater the escalation over migration, the more challenging negotiations on other EU policy areas, such as the budget, energy, and defence, may become. A test for Europe's future. For many experts, the dispute over the Migration Pact represents more than a policy disagreement over asylum. It symbolises the divergent interpretations of European solidarity. Western and Southern European countries advocate shared responsibility, while Eastern European states often perceive such obligations as a threat to sovereignty. Political scientist Jan Kovac of Charles University in Prague explains, the EU is trying to create a system of shared responsibility. What Brussels sees as solidarity is perceived as coercion in some capitals. That perception is the real issue. Looking ahead. In the coming months, the European Commission plans to present its first assessment of national implementation measures. Should certain member states fail to comply, infringement procedures could be initiated. At the same time, a political compromise is possible, including flexible exemptions or adjusted transition periods. Whether the Migration Pact will ultimately lead to a more stable EU migration policy or reveal new divisions remains uncertain. One thing is clear. The debate over migration continues to be a central test of European unity and the EU's capacity to find collective solutions in an increasingly fragmented political landscape.